The first season of Netflix's Love and Anarchy was a quirky rom-com that focused on some questionable morals. Sofie and Max are back for a second season, so is this going to amp up the charm and daring antics, or does it fizzle out? Newly divorced Sofie is trying to create a life for herself and Max. Due to unforeseen events, she instead finds herself in the middle of a life crisis, something that also has huge consequence on her relationship with Max, where nothing turns out the way they had hoped. The second season takes on a more mature tone that focuses less on the comedic dares between Sofie and Max and begins to grow up a little bit in the story direction. Sofie experiences a tragedy in her life that will guide her trajectory through the season. It provides some really great introspection, but also some very frustrating tension as Sofie works to acknowledge the tragedy and then come to terms with what it means for her life. The ramifications seep into her life in so many ways, adding some very realistic and powerful emotion to the narrative. The carefree tone of the dares between Sofie and Max is drastically diminished, but still present at times, and sometimes lightening the mood and other times creating even more conflict for the story. The show continues to have a slight feel of The Office as the camera follows the characters around and sometimes zooms in on a reaction or an interaction. But unlike that comedy series, the characters are not aware of the camera, nor is it acting as a character within the show. I really enjoyed the varied cast of characters that we get to see, as some of them frustrate me to no end because of how stupid or overreaching they are, but they also add an endearing quality because of their simple-mindedness. Friedrich gets a rather large focus in this one, as does Denise, and I enjoyed their arcs as they add a level of difficulty to the narrative as they stand up for their beliefs, but also get caught up in them. Caroline gets a slightly larger presence in this, and there was a storyline that began to emerge with her that created some good intrigue for me. We see some emotion from her that we don't normally see, and I would like to have explored that more because it built some good depth for the character, showing perhaps a bit more intimate look at her inner workings. Max is still fun in this, but it felt like a lot of the time was spent brooding rather than being more of the lighthearted, carefree guy. Now, I think his dynamic is real and believable for the situations, and he certainly brings a weight to some of the relational aspects. I just didn't really expect him to be so much more introspective and almost depressed through a lot of this. This season is 8 episodes that are each around 30-ish minutes, so it's not a massive binge, but it is going to take a small chunk out of your day if you watch it all at once. Now, I found the episodes to be well balanced in their tone. Portions would dive deep into the emotional well, examining hurts or ideals, but then other parts would focus on something less heavy, allowing us to breathe a bit before continuing on in the drama. Now, like in the first season, the staff of the publishing house takes an out-of-office excursion, but I was hoping for some crazy or uncomfortable challenges between Sofie and Max. This didn't really happen, and for the most part, this episode didn't really do anything for the relationship one way or the other. But there is a significant step taken for one of the characters that works to create a storyline that will continue through the rest of the season. The thing I really enjoyed about this season is how messy things were. While I would have loved to have more comedy interspersed throughout, the emotional and then the relational aspects that are examined give the show just a whole new depth, which then solidifies my interest in many of the characters as well as the story as a whole. It's not a vapid or even childish look at relationship complexities, but instead becomes more in tune with how people function, what motivates them, and how their decisions affect more than just one avenue of their life. Now, sometimes the show runs the risk of losing focus on some of the storylines, almost forgetting that they were a major focus at one point during the season. Now, I don't think this is a show ruiner, but it does feel like arcs get misplaced sometimes because something shinier and more intriguing comes along, pushing the other aspect right off the page of the script. Some of the conflict in the show also feels unresolved. Now, there's a scene where Sofie goes to this healing retreat sort of thing, and she has a conversation. Well, the outcome of that conversation is telegraphed, and it's very obvious. But more so, some interactions come as a result. And while some of those actions are addressed, the impetus for the actions, they're not. Is this a deal breaker? No, but I really like for even the small items to get addressed, even if it's a single line of dialogue, so it feels like the writers remembered what they had already set up. The soundtrack is a lot of fun, with many of the songs feeling upbeat and poppy. But something I really noticed was the silence that was infused in so many of the scenes. I mean, there would be no soundtrack or score, just our characters interacting, creating this sense of loneliness or sadness much of the time. It was effective in honing my attention to the scene, letting the actors and their emotions and dialogue dictate the tone rather than having the music influence my feelings. So overall, the second season of Love and Anarchy has moved past its more comical beginnings to delve deeper into a more emotional story base. There's still humor present, and it's often effective, but the approach to this season is certainly more mature and reserved. The acting continues to draw me in with characters that can run the gamut of emotions, be deeply flawed, and still elicit sympathy. I do miss the prevalence of challenges between Sofie and Max, but I also appreciate the way that their characters are growing. The approach to mental well-being is effective and heartfelt without being preachy or condescending. And while I do wish certain story elements would have received either more attention or at least resolution, the season as a whole was a very satisfying watch. There's a bunch of sex, some nudity, a lot of profanity, and a little bit of violence. I give Season 2 of Love and Anarchy 4 out of 5 couches. Are you a fan of this show? Do you have a favorite character? I think mine right now is Friedrich, but I'd love to know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.